Hey everyone, I am Dylan Mitchell, and this is the Rincon Horizons podcast, where we talk about what it means to reach the summit on your leadership journey. We want to help you lead better so your organization can climb higher. Each episode, I'm joined by my co-host and our main contributor, Todd Tuttle, managing partner of Rincon Aerospace. Todd, it's great to have you back. For listeners who may be meeting you for the first time digitally here, would you give us a quick overview of your background and how you ended up where you are today?
Sure, Dylan. Thank you. And glad to be back podcasting. Love to do this with you. This is fun. I'm the managing partner of Rincon Aerospace. We do executive level consulting for aerospace companies. I'm an aerospace industry executive and engineer. I've spent most of my career developing flight control systems for aircraft, designing things that fly or leading teams that do that. And I've had several roles in my career: chief engineer, director of engineering, vice president, things like that. But enough about me. Let's get on to our guest, because I am really stoked about our guest today. And I know you're going to do the formal introduction, but I really want to explain a bit about my personal connection to Dr. Valutis before we get started. You see, he's in the business of showing leaders how to improve themselves in their companies. He and I met more than 20 years ago when I was moving into executive leadership and kind of starting my leadership journey at a company called Moog Aircraft. And he worked with me and the whole leadership team for several years. He's got this really unique ability it's almost uncanny how he can almost see inside the mind of a leader, understand how they think, and then tell them or help them, show them what they need to do to improve. And he's very, very direct in almost a polite, interesting kind of way. He's got no fear of speaking truth, especially when people don't want to hear it. He's done it to me several times. And, our idea when we created this podcast was to help leaders understand their blind spots and weaknesses. And he's so good at that. He's a great guest for this podcast. And today's going to be great. It's going to be a master class in leadership today. I just can't wait.
But no pressure.
No pressure on Dr. Valutis, none at all, right? I haven't set the expectations too high at all. That's exactly right.
That's the nicest thing you said about me in 20 years, too. Can't we just stop right here?
Just cut it right here. There you go.
Well, like I said at the top of the show, here at Rincon Horizons, we talk about leading better so organizations can climb higher. Today's conversation with our guest, Dr. Chip Valutis, is about what leadership actually looks like at different stages of growth, and why the leadership that got you here, wherever here may be, might be the very thing holding you back. If you've spent any time around leadership organizations or growing businesses, there's a good chance you've felt the ripple effects of Dr. Valutis' work, even if you don't know his name yet. Dr. Valutis is an accomplished psychologist with more than 3 decades of experience in executive coaching and organizational development. He's helped leaders at every level, from first-time managers to CEOs and board members, in navigating complex, real-world environments. His work even spans Fortune 500 companies as well as small and mid-sized organizations, and he's seen just about every version of this should be working, but it's not. In reading his bio and researching Dr. Valutis, what really, to me, sets him apart is how he operates in the space between science and practice. He's deeply grounded in psychology and organizational systems, but he's not interested in theory for the sake of theory. His focus is on what actually works, what helps people, teams, and organizations move forward in a predictable and sustainable way. Earlier in his career, Dr. Valutis trained at Boston University, then went on to lead consulting initiatives in performance, assessment, and development before founding Valutis Consulting, which he ran for 3 decades. More recently, he launched Valutis LLC, where he's focused on writing, teaching, and helping business owners grow through what he calls talent-driven growth. That's a framework that represents the through line of his entire career. He also published his first book in 2024 by the same name, Talent-Driven Growth, Your Blueprint for Scalable Organizational Success. Dr. Valutis is based in Texas and has been married to his wife, who he's known since the age of 16. They have 3 grown children who are spread across New York, Tennessee, and Texas. His deep-rooted connection to his family serves as a source of inspiration and grounding in his personal endeavors. Dr. Valutis, that's a long resume. Welcome to the show. We're really glad you're here. To kick things off, let's start with something simple. What's something about you that people wouldn't learn from what I just said or from your LinkedIn profile?
Well, Dylan, thank you and Todd very, very much for reaching out and asking. I was pleasantly surprised to reconnect with Todd. It's been a delight to work with you. We're all friends. Please call me Chip. Dr. Valutis makes me feel like I need to sit up straight and use 5-syllable words. So we'll just be friends. I'm looking forward to it. I love that question. I kind of love and hate that question because that's a shrink question. Like me, you're trying to get into the deeper workings of my mind. That's well played, Dylan. What can I tell you that you wouldn't learn on my LinkedIn profile? I'll have to go back pre-professional identity. I would say probably one of the more formative elements of my life, and I didn't know it at the time, was an opportunity that we had. Actually, my father was a psychologist. He's passed, but when he got his PhD at Ball State University, we were living in Indiana, and they had a program where if he would go to Europe and teach Air Force people that wanted to get their masters, they would send us and house us to live in Europe. I ended up spending my entire 7th grade year, what is 7th grade, 12, 13 years old, somewhere in that range.
Sounds about
and
right.
most of my 8th grade year, living 6 months in Germany, 6 months in England, 3 months in Greece, 3 months in Spain. And we lived in the community. At the time, like a good 12, 13-year-old, I whined because I had to be away from my friends and I didn't want to do that. But the ability of that experience to open my eyes, and I remember it was kind of great parenting by my father. We would talk about, we had a rule over there. Nothing was weird. Everything was different. And baking that into our DNA, our meaning my brother and sister and I, but baking that into our DNA at such a relatively formative and early age, it's interesting. It's helped me as a psychologist. It's helped me as a consultant. It's helped me as a friend, as a husband, as a father. But it's like reserving that judgment, enhancing my curiosity. How does this culture work? We'd play cricket on Jesus Green in Cambridge, England. But my brother and I thought they were crazy that they didn't use baseball gloves. So we'd walk down there with a baseball glove and a regular bat. We'd hold the bat up here and just immerse ourselves as much as we can in that culture. And obviously that's not on my LinkedIn page, but I honestly think that had such an impact on shaping me and more my openness, my situational awareness, my self-awareness, and just my wanderlust that I have to this day.
So would you repeat that, Chip? You said nothing is wrong, everything is different. What was the 2 words?
So you would run across, we're in Munich and we see a man in lederhosen. And we said, man, look at that weird guy. Look what he's wearing.
That's right. Weird was the word, yeah.
Nothing's weird. Everything's different.
Got it. Yeah,
look at that
advice.
meal. Look at that person. Look at that building. Yeah, and it's such a great way to frame and classify. Now, I'm not saying I'm good at it every single time. I still see weird things in the world, but at least I have that thread, kind of saying, hey, it's different. We don't know that story. We don't know that history. We don't know that culture. It's different.
Yeah, I think that really lends itself to the introduction as well, navigating complex real world environments.
Exactly.
Maybe it should be on your LinkedIn bio.
I'll work on that.
You can title it as amateur or aspiring cricket player.
There you go. I like that. That's funny.
So, Chip, in your book, Talent-Driven Growth, The Blueprint for Scalable Organizational Success, you say that your job as a leader is to facilitate movement. The movement needed is dictated by where you are on the journey. The journey is outlined by the S-curve and the life cycle of movement. Did I get that quote right?
Yeah, that's yep.
So would you start, if you don't mind, by explaining the sigmoid curve or S-curve and kind of walk us through what an S-curve and life cycle of movement is?
I'd be happy to. It is the simplest and most insight-driven concept I ever came across. The first time I remember seeing the S-curve or the sigmoid curve, I was reading a book by Charles Handy. It's called The Empty Raincoat, Making Sense of the Future. And it was written back in 95. So this was probably not that far from there, but I'm actually going to read a very short excerpt from Mr. Handy's book that kind of shows you how that seed of interest in the S-curve really sparked with me. He writes this: the sigmoid curve sums up the story of life itself. Very powerful. We start slowly and experimentally, and we wax and then we wane. It's the story of the British Empire. It's the story of the Russian Empire and all empires over time. It's the story of a product's life cycle. Many corporations rise and fall. It even describes the course of love and relationships.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you got a shrink who's trying to work in industry, who's young and building his business. And it's like, what in the world is this? It's actually a mathematical construct. So again, as a psychologist, we take statistics, but we don't take a lot of...
Be scary. It's going to get scary if Chip's going to do math here. I'm going to get scared.
But the easy way to explain the S-curve before I kind of give some of the specifics, nature is an S-curve. Life is an S-curve. Anything that has cyclical and systemic properties, like nature. Right now it's winter, and I happen to be sitting in Buffalo, New York, where instead of Texas. But in winter that you endure this cycle. We have leading indicators of when snow starts to melt and trees start to bud, and we know we're transitioning into spring. And then we get into spring, and we have leading and lagging indicators of spring, and we move into summer, and then summer moves into fall, and fall moves into winter. We know this. If you're in Western New York and it's Halloween, you're finding your snow shovels and you're putting away your rakes. We know what's going to come. In life, you're a newborn. You're a fragile newborn that life itself depends on your parents. You become a little kid. You kind of grow through this growth phase and go through teenage years, early adult years, mid-adult years. At some point, you plateau. I won't say what age that is because I'm probably well beyond it, but you begin plateauing and then you get into decline, and eventually, unlike nature, you die, which is not as happy of a story that you don't get to go back and try again. But it's this predictable, cyclical, systemic path that people follow. And for organizations, really the 5 classic stages, or 6 if you count the beginning, you have a learning phase. I have a twinkle in my eye. I have a hope. I have a goal. I have a dream, to use Martin Luther King, of this business I want to build. And when I can actually articulate that and have a prototype or something to sell, I move into early growth. It's the entrepreneurial, it's the startup phase. It's trying to figure out, what do I have to do to make my business survive? Then if I can keep it surviving, I start to try to scale it. Scaling it is more mature growth, bringing in process, procedure, protocol. Eventually, you will plateau. Your products get tired, your market gets old, something happens, you plateau, you'll enter decline. Same thing, early kind of decline is still manageable. You get in late decline, and if you don't do anything about it, you can die, just like human nature. Beauty of the S-curve, though, it allows us this construct called jumping the S, which is phoenix, if you will, a rebirthing, that if leaders are paying attention to the opportunities in the tea leaves, they can look for that opportunity to reinvent themselves somewhere in that mature growth or pinnacle, ideally, and literally live for another day, climb to a higher height, and continue on forever. That's just high level. Hopefully that works. But it's, for me, who's interested in organizational change, systemic change, holistic type thinking, as simple as it is, I can do so much with that model.
At what point in your career did you really start to apply the concepts of the S-curve to businesses? Was it something from the beginning? Is it something you came up with 5 years ago?
It was my model. The way I worked, I tended to embed myself with a smaller handful of clients and spend decades with them. So it wasn't a deliberate decision, Todd. I wasn't smart enough to think, hey, this would really make a lot of sense. But because I had that style, I could actually start to see, it's like, oh, look at this. This organization is beginning to outgrow its people, its systems, and its processes. And they need to begin upgrading this and strengthening the infrastructure and finding a different type of leader for the challenge that the business is facing right now. I wasn't saying, I'm transitioning from this phase of the S-curve to the next, but I was a part of that journey. Honestly, it was when I started to really slow down in, a year or two before I wrote my book and just think, well, how do I do what I do? What am I? Try to make a little bit more aware of some of what I was doing. And I could see example after example of the S-curve at play, even though I wasn't that deliberate or intentional at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because I was trying to remember, we were working together back at Mo 20 years ago. I didn't remember you talking about it that deliberately. So I thought, was I asleep? Did I just miss it? Or no, I guess you weren't yet.
It wasn't overt. So if we can, without telling Moog stories, thinking about the way in the early days you guys would develop these huge systemic programs like the Joint Strike Fighter that you've mentioned before. It's like, this is no longer a small, how do we do a couple of tweaks to our actuator? This is developing an entire system. And it took different kind of thinking, different kind of process, different kind of people, quite candidly, to be able to do that. I wish I would have used those labels more overtly than I did back then because I think they fit beautifully. But I've done it all along without really giving it the credit it's probably due. I've done it with myself. When I came to Buffalo in 93, I worked a lot with family-owned businesses. And then I moved to more privately held businesses. And then I evolved to more publicly traded businesses. I was jumping the S curve, if you will, with different markets and different problem statements.
Absolutely. Well, I guess to think you talked about transitions in the different phases of the S curve. And another part of your book, you say, and I'll quote you, while the transition from make it happen to do it right is a painful and difficult phase of the life cycle, it pays great rewards and dividends to leaders who successfully navigate the required movement. Then you say, warning, this is one of the toughest movements to manage on the life cycle. The substantial difference between early growth and mature growth is challenging. And that really caught my eye with the big warning. Would you give us some more details about what this is, why that's so tough, and then maybe some advice to companies and leaders for how to make that transition?
One of the things the S curve does by identifying these phases, in this case, we're talking about organizational growth and evolution, is each of the phases sets a different context, a different set of circumstances. And each of those sets of circumstance give us great insight on the type of people or talent we need, challenges that the organization will be facing in that phase, and the type of leader we need. When you're in early growth, when you're a startup, and if you've had the opportunity to work for startups, or even some of you listening may be in startups, it is the world of MacGyver and Rambo and blood, sweat, and tears. It ain't
superheroes,
pretty.
huh? Superheroes.
Exactly. Superheroes, exactly.
Superheroes.
It
Firefighters.
it ain't pretty, but it's got to get done. Somebody calls us, can you guys help me with this? Absolutely. I got to make payroll next week. I can help you with anything. And then I figure out how do I do it and where do I go? So you have these high energy, shoot from the hip, handful of superheroes, just literally muscling results. We can't afford ERP systems. We can't afford consultants. We're bootstrapped. We're hungry. We're fighters. And we somehow figure it out. When you start to hear in the hallways or you see it in the eyes of the tired superheroes that this realization, I ain't got much left. The water level, I got one nostril out of the water and that's about it. I can't keep doing this. And you get this flavor of we've got to start working smarter, not harder. That's the first major leading indicator that we're outgrowing this early phase. We have some stability. We have a brand. We have products that work. We have customers that call. We're not as worried about payroll. So now it's time to be smarter, more deliberate, build policy, procedure, swim lanes, accountability, plans, X matrices, all the kind of quote unquote professional management type techniques that your young MBA could teach you. But who do we have in our building? MacGyver, Rambo, and Superman and Wonder Woman. They don't want that stuff. Like, whoa. I'll just get out of my way. I'll save Gotham. You don't have to give me a swim lane or a racy chart. And you get this massive cultural clash between those that got us here and the type that will get us to where we want to be.
So a couple of follow-ups there, because you said a lot of interesting things I'd like to unpack a bit. One of the things, and we've probably all been in companies like that. In my career, I've had people say to me along that line, because I tended to be the more process, driven kind of person. That was me. And I've had people on the other side say, gee, Todd, process stifles creativity. We can't, we got to be careful with the process. And if you dealt with that in your career too, where process and on the edge of that curve, is that what's causing some of this?
It's causing some of the clash. I listened to one of your earlier podcasts where you were talking about a meeting where your boss was telling you you're too black and white, and you were kind of listening back, you were thinking back on that. That's a really good example. The mind of the engineers, there's a right way and a wrong way. In the minds of Rambo or Batman or Wonder Woman, whatever way saves the day is the right way. There's no standardization. There's no roadmap. That's some of the conflict is we're still staffed and our culture still is that shoot from the hip and do whatever it takes. And now we're in the no, we're not going to do that. And it's very confusing to people. The people that thrive in the early growth are thinking we're killing the company with bureaucracy in the mature growth. Getting that we're really having to change the mindset. We're changing the people. We're changing the way we run our business. That's what makes that transition between those phases so very, very difficult to round the corner and get through. And that's not even counting the owner, the founder, or the bigwig. If the bigwig doesn't have that self-awareness, that situational awareness, that I've got to evolve the way I run my business, they'll end up getting stuck there. There is a lot of lifestyle businesses that have established very profitable, very healthy businesses, and they've stayed in that entrepreneurial mindset, and they happily do that for their entire career, ridiculously successful. And then some bigger firm can come in and say, this business is ripe to grow, and they'll put in the infrastructure needed for more.
You kind of went to where I was thinking. You were talking about changing people. And I wanted to know, you know, I guess when you think about changing people, you think about changing the players on the team. But when do you change the coach or the quarterback? Is that sometimes necessary too in that stage?
It can be. It's often difficult to change at that stage because a lot of times the head of the company is actually the founder of the company. He or she started it themselves. It's a little harder to walk into the entrepreneurial founder and say, you're our biggest bottleneck, you have to go. Now, if you're lucky enough to have an advisory board or a really strong spouse at home to hit you in the head, if need be, one of the things you have to have, my opinion, it really takes a leader with the level of self-awareness and humility to say, okay, maybe what I used to do isn't working and I need to look for something different. At that particular phase, it's difficult. The other place where the leader is really the key is when you get into early decline or late decline. And that leader is just hanging on so tight to what he or she knows, they're really riding the company right into the ground.
I think that's a good point that I wanted to come back to, talking about the stages or the phases of the life cycle of a business that you talked about earlier. And you said the last two are decline, which you just mentioned, and broke that up into early and late decline. And did you say dead or done? I don't remember.
Both work.
Both work. For people, dead. For businesses, maybe done. And just kind of listening and thinking through that while you and Todd were talking, no one wants to lead their company into decline, and certainly not done. And you say that to avoid decline, companies have to jump the S-curve. And just kind of listening to you and Todd talk, would you say that jumping the S-curve is like changing the quarterback or the team captain? Or I guess, what does that mean and how do companies do it?
Jumping the S is largely leaving one growth trajectory and finding or joining another one. The best example I can give you would be Netflix. When was the last time you got a little red envelope in your mailbox with a DVD in it that you could play? And Netflix, through their journey, I haven't studied them in depth, but they began as kind of that Blockbuster competitor. We have an easier way. You can stay in your jammies. We're going to deliver the DVD right to your house. You don't have to go out in the cold and the dark. But look at them today. They're one of the biggest producers of content. They're this massive streaming service, this massive content creation organization, and now they're starting to air NFL football games. They have reinvented their business model. They have looked at where they were. The best time, paradoxically, to jump the S is actually in the middle of your mature growth phase. And it's just not the time leaders begin thinking about, all right, let's reinvent ourselves. Like, why? We finally figured this out. We're growing. But it's thinking about what's that disruptive technology? What are those major changes? McKinsey actually has kind of their 3 horizons of growth. I don't know if you've ever heard of those before, but it's kind of a cool model that they've developed. And jumping the S is really more on the 3rd horizon of growth. Their horizon 1 level of change is where you're really trying to find out what kind of method, technology, service, or product will help us maintain our core business. Horizon 2 is I'm looking for an adjacency that's a logical bolt-on. Todd may be going from weapons bays to landing systems or something. I'm staying on the aircraft. I'm just looking for a different part to begin switching to. And then Horizon 3 is really, I'm going to begin producing content. I'm really changing the core of my business model. And then that triggers you back into that learning phase. There's a lot of ideation and trying to figure out what are we going to be next. And then we get back into some of that early phase and continue to climb. I can't rattle off good examples right now, but Europe seems to have a number of examples. Beretta. I think Beretta's been in business for hundreds and hundreds of years. Or if you go to your grocery store and buy some good German beer, it's been in business since 1463.
Yeah.
It's like now, in that case, they didn't jump the S. They just had a high-quality product that continued to sell for centuries. But that's a little bit what that jumping the S is that recognition that we're not going to be able to ride this ride. And it changes by industry. Todd grew up in flight controls. I'm pretty sure, and Todd can correct me, flight control still works pretty much the same way it did with Lewis and Clark. The principles in physics are pretty much the same.
I don't know if it was Lewis and Clark or Orville and Wilbur, but yes.
Well,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
How's that for a Freudian slip? Good catch.
This is an audio podcast, Chip, and I wish this is one of the times I wish we were doing a video podcast. It was interesting as I was reading your book. You talk about the jumping the S curve because you show it visually, and I'm a mathematical guy. I see the visuals, and the interesting part to me is if you think about an S, at the beginning of it, it goes down before it comes up. And I think what you're saying, and maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, but I saw the curve as growth. And what that said to me was, you basically said, I'm at the mature part of, I'm growing rapidly. And to jump the S, I've got to take some time and actually do things that are going to stunt my growth before it turns around.
100%.
And I wonder if you could talk about that and how you convince a company that's just knocking out the park, especially if they've got investors or things like that, pressure on them to meet the quarter. I've got to meet the quarter. And you're saying, I'm going to do what? I'm going to take these people and this money, and I'm actually going to have some negative growth. How hard is that? And what do companies have to do to get that in their mind to do long-term thinking rather than just short-term thinking?
It's a great question. I try to make sure the problem statement, we aren't going to be able to ride this ride for long. We see the data. We see the evidence. It's time to reinvent ourselves. That is an important piece you really have to understand. And then, quite honestly, if you can get beyond the emotion, it's normally the emotion driving that, Todd. I'm afraid. I don't want to, this has worked. I worked so hard to do this, and now you want me to let go. But I use simple examples. Todd, do you want to take 5 points off your handicap? I'd love to take 5 points off my handicap. Well, your grip is horrible, and it's really messing you up. Now, I'm going to change your grip, and you're not going to be able to hit the ball at all. You're going to be at the driving range calling me bad names because I've taken away your 25 handicap, trying to get you to a 20, and that's your learning curve. That's where Todd's actually getting worse before it clicks and practice helps him get better. I try to normalize it. You change jobs, and I don't have my brand that I had before. I don't have the equity I had before. I don't have the knowledge of the customers or the products. I actually dip a little bit before I can hit my stride again. Most aspects of life, we have that kind of, it's just learning curve is really what it is. And for some, it's a deterrent. For some, it's really, really exciting because I know I'm going to come out on the other side 5 points lower on my handicap.
There you go.
Well, I think even maybe at like a very, very, very high level, another place, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but I don't think so. I think you could even say it whenever a new president comes into office, they're given their first 100 days to navigate that change, whether they're coming back in for a second term or they're a new president. There's certainly that curve where they have to navigate coming back in where the other person left off and changing it to their.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Todd, using examples you and I both know, the company you work for, Moog, where you and I met, strategically and brilliantly, quite frankly, decided to jump the S by going from a component supplier to a systems supplier. You got on the 787. Wow, how did we win that? We're the new boys on the block in this. And remember the learning curve of that proposal and that program?
So it was enormous because you think of the scope
you guys
of that.
would say, we can't repeat this on the A350 or the Joint Strike Fighter or you kind of like it hurt really badly. but you learned a ton and you rounded that corner. And I don't know lately, but you were the premier flight control system in the world.
I believe Moog still is the premier flight control supplier in the world.
But that's a perfect example of, we have never done a full system flight control package before. We have jumped the S to this new journey, and we're going to stub our toe.
Yeah, because at the time, and I had people come to me at the time and say, why do we even want to do systems engineering anyway? The money's in building the hardware. Let's just build the hardware. Well, let somebody else worry about the systems. And the reality was, at the time, fortunately, the leaders at Moog were smart enough to see that where the aerospace industry was going, OEMs didn't want to do all of that engineering anymore. They wanted the whole system to come in.
Exactly.
And if you do the system, then you can pick yourself to do all the electronics and the hardware and the mechanical stuff that makes all the money. It was a brilliant move. And I was, if you think about what Moog did, I'd love to take credit for it, but I can't. If you look at the first 10 years that I was at Moog, from the end of 2022 to 2012, I think Moog aircraft grew from about 350 million to about 1.2 billion. It was an incredible rise, and that's a great example of a legacy company that built a mechanical company building hardware that jumped the S curve. Great example of that.
And keeping the S curve theme, you're sitting in those meetings, you're looking at the leading indicators of margins getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're playing out in your mind's eye strategically, how's this story going to end? And it's going to end by a plateau and a decline. And then the decline is going to continue. So having the visionary minds, and well, what could we do to address this? Well, what if we went from components to systems? Oh, wow, that's interesting. We don't know how to do that. We're not known for that. You go through that phase of ideation and trying to really figure out what that looks like. And then you start the realization of that. You guys hooked the 787, and it's like, catching a great white with a little bobber and a reel in your grandpa's backyard, and you somehow landed it.
And if you're sitting in our conference rooms as we were in the dip of the learning curve, it was some long, cold nights in Buffalo for a while.
Amen.
But,
Amen.
We certainly came out on the other side after all that investment.
Yeah, it's a wonderful example of jumping the S, to your point, Dylan. It's also a wonderful example of deliberately navigating the S curve. Again, you're not walking around saying that.
Sure.
I'm not thinking, when I go get my snow shovels out of the back cabinet there, I'm not thinking, I'm managing my nature's S curve. I'm just doing it because my leading indicators are suggesting we're about to go to another phase.
That's all the time we have for this episode, but this conversation isn't over. We're going to pause here and pick it up in the next episode. Huge thanks to Chip for joining us today. And Todd, as always, thank you. And thanks to you for listening. On every episode of Rincon Horizons, we unpack the moments and decisions that shape us as leaders, at work, at home, and everywhere in between. Our goal is simple: to help you lead better so your organization can climb higher. If today's conversation resonated with you, like and subscribe, and consider sharing it with a friend or a colleague who's on their own leadership journey, because we all are. You can learn more about Chip and his work at Valutis.com. That's Valutis, Valutis.com, or through the links in the show notes. To learn more about Rincon Aerospace or connect with Todd, head to rincon.aero. That's RINCON.aero. I'm Dylan Mitchell, and you can find more of my work at DM.supply. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Rincon Horizons podcast.